Natasha's face burned as she stared at the hospital bracelet on her wrist. December 1st, 2023. 42 years old. And cradled against her chest, still warm and breathing, was a newborn baby girl she had no idea she'd been carrying. The nurses kept asking what name to put on the birth certificate, but Natasha already knew. She'd known for 17 years. The baby's name was Reese, just like it had always been in the dream. The same dream that visited her every single Christmas since 2003. The same silver-wrapped present under the tree. The same handwritten tag. And now, impossibly, that dream was breathing in her arms. If you love stories about miracles, faith, and the unexplainable mysteries that change our lives forever, smash that like button and subscribe to hear more incredible true stories. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love hearing from you all around the world. 23 years earlier, on a frigid January morning in Charlotte, North Carolina, Natasha gave birth to her daughter Rebecca after 14 brutal hours of labor. The delivery was catastrophic. Dr. Patricia Brennan worked frantically to stop the hemorrhaging while Natasha drifted in and out of consciousness. Her husband, Brad, gripping her hand like it was the only thing tethering her to life. When they finally placed Rebecca in her arms, the joy was overwhelming. But Dr. Brennan's words afterward carved a permanent wound into Natasha's heart. Severe uterine scarring, damaged fallopian tubes. The statistical probability of conceiving again hovered near zero. Brad tried to hide his disappointment behind reassurances that one healthy child was more than enough, but Natasha saw the flicker of grief in his eyes. She'd always imagined a house full of voices, chaotic and loud and bursting with life. For 5 years, Natasha poured every ounce of maternal love into Rebecca. She volunteered at the elementary school, hosted elaborate birthday parties, and created traditions that made their little family of 3 feel complete, even when it didn't. Brad worked long hours at the construction company, climbing from crew supervisor to project manager, while Natasha built a life around being the mother she'd always dreamed of being. They were happy, genuinely happy, but that hollowness never quite disappeared. December 2003 arrived with the first real snowfall Charlotte had seen in years. Rebecca, now 5 years old, pressed her face against the living room window, squealing as fat flakes tumbled from the gray sky. Natasha spent the afternoon transforming their modest home into a Christmas wonderland, Rebecca dancing around her legs as they strung lights and hung ornaments. That evening, after tucking Rebecca into bed and reading The Night Before Christmas twice, Natasha collapsed onto the couch beside Brad, exhausted and content. She fell asleep watching the colored lights blink on their tree. The dream arrived without warning. Natasha stood in their living room, but it was different, older somehow. The furniture had changed. The walls were a soft cream instead of pale blue. And she was older too. She could feel it in her bones, see it in the reflection of the darkened television screen. The Christmas tree stood in the same corner, decorated with the same ornaments, but underneath it sat 2 presents. One had Rebecca's name in looping cursive. The other, wrapped in metallic silver paper that caught the light like water, bore a name Natasha had never heard before. Reese. She reached for the silver package, her fingers tingling as they grazed the ribbon, and felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of love so powerful it knocked the breath from her lungs. She looked down and saw her hand resting on a rounded belly. Pregnant. Impossible, but there it was. Natasha woke with tears streaming down her face, her heart hammering against her ribs. Brad stirred beside her, mumbling something incoherent before rolling over. She sat up, hugging her knees to her chest, trying to make sense of what she'd just experienced. It wasn't like a normal dream that evaporates the moment you wake. Every detail remained crystalline. The texture of the wrapping paper, the way the lights reflected off the ornament hooks, the name Reese written in her own handwriting. She whispered the name aloud in the darkness. Reese. It felt significant, weighted with meaning she couldn't grasp. The following morning, Natasha tried to shake off the strange intensity of the dream. She made Mickey Mouse pancakes for Rebecca, helped Brad find his missing work gloves, and went about her day with determined normalcy. But that night, As she climbed into bed, a tremor of anticipation ran through her. Would the dream return? It didn't. She slept dreamlessly, and by the end of the week, she'd almost convinced herself it was just her subconscious processing the grief of her infertility. Then December 2004 arrived, and with it, the dream came back. Identical in every way. The same living room, the same presence, the same name. Reese. This time when Natasha woke, she grabbed the notebook from her nightstand and wrote down every detail she could remember, sketching the layout of the room, describing the silver wrapping paper, noting the overwhelming feeling of recognition and love. She showed the entry to Brad over coffee that morning. He read it with furrowed brows, clearly unsure what to make of it. "Maybe it's just because you want another baby," he offered gently. "Your mind is creating something to hold on to." Natasha nodded, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. Year after year, the dream returned with clockwork precision, always in December, always identical. By 2007, Natasha had filled an entire journal with entries, each one documenting the same unchanging vision. She confided in her best friend Marion Fletcher during a coffee date, spreading the journal pages across the table at their favorite cafe. Marion, a deeply spiritual woman who believed in signs and synchronicities, studied the entries with intense focus. "This isn't random, Tasha," Marion said firmly. "This is a message, maybe even a promise." Natasha wanted to believe her, but the medical reality was unforgiving. Dr. Brennan had been unequivocal about her chances. Natasha redirected her energy outward, volunteering at the Elmwood Community Center, where she met Judith Carmichael, the center's director. Judith was a widow in her 60s with silver hair and a laugh that could fill a room. She took Natasha under her wing, involving her in everything from after-school programs to the annual Christmas charity drive. The work gave Natasha purpose, a way to channel the maternal instinct that had nowhere else to go. She grew close to the families they served, including Shanice Winters, a young single mother raising twin boys on her own. Natasha babysat when Shanice worked double shifts, attended the twins' soccer games, and became a surrogate aunt. It helped, but it didn't erase the longing. Rebecca grew from a precocious child into a thoughtful teenager. She excelled in school, played violin in the orchestra, and planned to study biology at UNC Chapel Hill. Natasha was immensely proud, but as Rebecca's senior year approached, the reality of an empty nest loomed like a gathering storm. The dream, meanwhile, intensified. In December 2018, Natasha didn't just see the presence under the tree. She heard a baby crying. The sound was so real that she woke convinced someone was in the house. She searched every room, heart pounding before accepting it had been part of the vision. The cry embedded itself in her memory, replaying at random moments throughout the day. When Rebecca left for college in August 2020, Natasha unraveled. She wandered through the house, touching Rebecca's abandoned possessions, sat in her empty bedroom crying for no reason she could articulate, and struggled to sleep. Brad, worried, suggested therapy. Dr. Ellen Pritchard was a clinical psychologist who specialized in grief and loss. Over several months of sessions, they explored Natasha's complicated relationship with motherhood, her unresolved trauma from Rebecca's birth, and the recurring dream. Dr. Pritchard's assessment was clinical but not unkind. The dream was a manifestation of unfulfilled desire, a way for Natasha's subconscious to process the child she couldn't have. It made sense logically, but when December arrived and the dream returned with even greater clarity, Natasha couldn't accept that explanation. This time she saw Reese's face, dark curls framing a cherubic face, blue eyes exactly like Brad's, a dimple in her left cheek. The pandemic year isolated Natasha further. With the community center closed and Rebecca stuck at school, Natasha spent hours poring over her dream journal, counting the years. 17 Decembers, 17 identical visions. She photographed the pages and created a digital timeline, searching for patterns or changes she might have missed. There were none. Brad grew increasingly concerned, gently suggesting they stop decorating so elaborately if it triggered such distress. Natasha refused with a vehemence that surprised them both. Those decorations, That tree, that moment, it was the only time she felt close to Reese, even if Reese was just a phantom. Marion proposed a radical idea over Zoom one evening. What if you adopt? What if you find a child who needs a home and name her Reese? Maybe that's what the dream is telling you to do. Natasha considered it seriously, even researching adoption agencies, but something felt fundamentally wrong about the suggestion. The dream wasn't calling her to find Reese. The dream was showing her that Reese was already hers, already coming, already real in some way that transcended medical impossibility. By the summer of 2023, Natasha had reached a fragile acceptance. She would never understand the dream, but she could choose to see it as a beautiful mystery rather than a source of pain. She threw herself back into community center work as pandemic restrictions lifted, taking on the role of chairperson for their annual Christmas festival. The event had been canceled 2 years running, and Judith was determined to make 2023 the biggest celebration yet. Natasha coordinated with volunteers, including Denzel Murray, a logistics coordinator with military precision, and Keiko Tanaka, whose eye for aesthetic design transformed their modest budget into something magical. November arrived unseasonably warm. Natasha felt off, a vague malaise she attributed to stress and the approach of her 43rd birthday. She was tired constantly, her jeans felt snug, and she had persistent indigestion. A visit to her new primary care physician, Dr. Marcus Vega, resulted in basic blood work that came back normal. Perimenopause, he suggested. Natasha accepted the diagnosis without question. She was 42. Her body was changing. Nothing about this seemed alarming. Thanksgiving brought Rebecca home with surprising news. She was engaged to Tyler Chen, her boyfriend of 2 years, and they wanted to get married the following summer. The celebration was joyous, but Natasha felt strangely detached, moving through the motions while her mind wandered. She blamed exhaustion from festival preparations. Black Friday shopping with Rebecca and Marion left her so breathless, she had to sit down 3 times. Marion eyed her suspiciously. "When was the last time you saw a doctor?" she demanded. "Last week," Natasha replied. "Everything's fine, just stress." December 1st dawned cold and crystalline, the first Zhenjiang winter weather of the season. Natasha woke with severe cramping that radiated across her lower back. She dry-swallowed antacids and dressed in layers, determined to power through. Brad had already left for a job site across town. The community center was expecting a massive delivery of decorations, including a 12-foot Fraser fir that would serve as the festival centerpiece. Natasha arrived at 9 to find controlled chaos. Denzel directed volunteers hauling boxes, while Keiko laid out her design plan across 3 folding tables. The tree arrived on a flatbed truck, majestic and fragrant. It took 6 people to maneuver it through the double doors and into the main hall. Natasha supervised the anchoring, triple-checking the base stability before they began decorating. By 10:30, she was on a ladder stringing lights through the upper branches. The cramping had intensified into something sharper, more insistent, but she ignored it. Just pulled muscles from lifting boxes. Nothing she couldn't handle. At 11:15, Natasha reached for a box of vintage glass ornaments Judith had collected over decades. The pain that struck was unlike anything she'd experienced outside of labor. She gasped, clutching the ladder rail, and felt a sudden warm gush between her legs. Confusion hit before panic. She looked down at the puddle forming on the floor, her mind refusing to process what was happening. Keiko's scream pierced the air. "Natasha! Oh my God! Natasha!" The ladder tilted as Natasha's legs gave out. Denzel appeared from nowhere, catching her before she hit the ground. The pain came in waves now, rhythmic and all-consuming. She heard voices shouting, someone calling 911, but it all sounded distant and muffled. Her body knew what was happening even as her brain rejected it. Contractions. She was having contractions, but that was impossible. She wasn't pregnant. She couldn't be pregnant. Paramedics Carlos Jennings and Anya Volkov arrived within minutes. Carlos took one look at Natasha, and his expression shifted into urgent professionalism. "Ma'am, you're in active labor. We need to get you to the hospital immediately." Natasha tried to explain that he was wrong, that there had been a mistake, but another contraction stole her breath. Anya checked her vitals and examined her with swift efficiency. "The baby's crowning," she said quietly to Carlos. "We might not make it." They loaded Natasha into the ambulance, Judith somehow climbing in beside her, holding her hand with fierce maternal protectiveness. Judith grabbed her phone and called Brad, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Brad, get to Carolina Medical Center right now. Don't ask questions, just trust me and drive." The ambulance screamed through Charlotte's streets, every bump sending fresh agony through Natasha's body. She focused on Judith's face, using it as an anchor while her world imploded. Carolina Medical Center's emergency entrance was ready for them. Dr. Simone Blackwell, an OB-GYN who'd been paged from another delivery, met them at the door. Her eyes widened when she heard Natasha's frantic explanation that she didn't know she was pregnant, had no prenatal care, didn't understand how this was possible. "We'll figure it out later," Dr. Blackwell said firmly. "Right now, we deliver this baby safely." The delivery room was blindingly bright. Nurses Grace Mulligan and Tanya Rhodes moved with choreographed precision, prepping Natasha while Dr. Blackwell scrubbed in. Natasha felt like she was drowning, every contraction pulling her under. And then suddenly Brad was there, his face pale and terrified, gripping her hand like a lifeline. "What's happening?" he kept asking. "Tasha, what's happening?" She couldn't answer, could only push when they told her to push, her body following ancient instructions her mind couldn't comprehend. At 12:03 p.m., a baby's cry pierced the air. Dr. Blackwell lifted a tiny, perfect infant, still connected by the umbilical cord, and placed her on Natasha's chest. The baby had dark curls plastered to her head, and blue eyes that somehow locked onto Natasha's face with impossible focus. Recognition slammed into Natasha with physical force. She knew this baby, had known her for 17 years. "It's her," she sobbed. "It's really her." Brad stared at both of them, tears streaming down his face, completely lost. "Who?" he whispered. Natasha looked at him, at their daughter, at the impossible miracle breathing against her skin. "Reese," she said. "Her name is Reese." The hospital room gradually quieted as medical staff completed their assessments. Reese was perfectly healthy, 7 pounds 2 ounces, full term, no complications despite the complete lack of prenatal care. Natasha's vitals stabilized. Dr. Blackwell sat on the edge of the bed, her professional composure cracked by visible wonder. "You genuinely had no idea you were pregnant?" she asked. Natasha shook her head. "I was told I couldn't have more children. The scarring from my first delivery." Dr. Blackwell pulled up Natasha's records, reading Dr. Brennan's notes from 23 years earlier. "Cryptic pregnancies happen in about 1 in 2,500 cases, she explained. "Given your medical history and age, you had no reason to suspect. Your uterine positioning, likely due to the scarring, hid the pregnancy. The weight gain was minimal. If you were already experiencing perimenopause symptoms," she trailed off, shaking her head. "This is extraordinary." Brad sat in stunned silence until Rebecca burst through the door, having driven 90 minutes from Chapel Hill at speeds she'd never admit to. She froze when she saw the baby in Natasha's arms. "Mom?" Her voice cracked. "Is that—" Natasha nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "Rebecca, meet your sister, meet Reese." Rebecca approached slowly, reverently, reaching out to touch Reese's impossibly small hand. "How?" she breathed. Natasha looked at Brad, then at Rebecca, and began to explain 17 years of dreams. She showed them the photos of her journal on her phone, entry after entry documenting identical visions. Brad read them with shaking hands, his skepticism dissolving into something like awe. "You dreamed of her," he said slowly. "For 17 years you dreamed of our daughter before she existed." Natasha corrected him gently. "She always existed. I just didn't know how to find her yet." Dr. Patricia Brennan, Natasha's original obstetrician, visited the next morning. She was semi-retired now, only consulting on unusual cases, and this qualified. She examined Natasha's records, reviewed the delivery notes, and sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed. "I told you that you'd likely never conceive again," she said quietly. "I was wrong. I'm so grateful I was wrong." She held Reese carefully, studying her with medical fascination and something deeper, something that transcended science. "Some things can't be explained by anatomy and statistics," Dr. Brennan said finally. "Some things are simply miracles." News of Natasha's story spread through Charlotte's tight-knit communities like wildfire. Judith brought a prayer blanket hand-stitched by the quilting circle at St. Catherine's Church. Marion arrived with enough casseroles to feed them for a month, crying openly as she held Reese. Keiko brought a traditional Japanese omamori charm for protection and health. Father Anthony DeLuca from St. Catherine's offered to perform a christening whenever they were ready. Even Shanice, juggling her twin boys, stopped by with a gift bag full of newborn essentials and a card that read, "For the miracle baby we've all been waiting for." A local reporter named Vanessa Moretti caught wind of the story and requested an interview. Natasha hesitated, protective of her family's privacy, but Brad pointed out that maybe their story could bring hope to others struggling with infertility, or comfort to those who'd experienced inexplicable dreams and premonitions. The interview aired on December 5th, a brief human interest segment that somehow captured national attention. Within days, Natasha's story had been shared across social media platforms, generating millions of responses. Women from around the world messaged her with their own experiences of cryptic pregnancies, prophetic dreams, and medical impossibilities that became reality. December 5th was also the day they brought Reese home. Brad drove 5 miles under the speed limit, treating every stoplight like a sacred ritual. Charlotte had transformed into a winter wonderland overnight, Christmas lights twinkling from every storefront, wreaths adorning doors, inflatable Santas waving from yards. Natasha sat in the back seat beside Reese's car seat, unable to look away from her daughter's sleeping face. Rebecca filmed the journey on her phone, documenting every moment. When they pulled into the driveway, Natasha's breath caught. Their house was completely decorated, lights outlining the roof, a wreath on the door, and through the front window she could see the tree. Rebecca had finished setting it up while they were in the hospital, following the design Natasha had sketched weeks earlier. Brad carried Reese inside while Natasha walked slowly, her body still recovering, her heart racing with anticipation she couldn't name. The living room stopped her in her tracks. The tree stood in the corner, decorated exactly as it appeared in her dreams. Vintage ornaments hung from branches, colored lights cast soft shadows across the walls, and underneath, carefully arranged, were 2 presents. One wrapped in red paper with Rebecca's name, one wrapped in metallic silver with a tag that read, "Reese," in handwriting that matched Natasha's dream journal entries perfectly. Rebecca had recreated the vision down to the smallest detail. Natasha sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. Brad sat beside her, Reese cradled in his arms, and Rebecca curled up on Natasha's other side. They sat in silence, watching the lights blink, listening to Reese's soft breathing, experiencing a moment that transcended language. Natasha finally understood. The dream hadn't been prophecy or premonition. It had been a promise. A whisper across time that said, "Hold on. She's coming. You'll know her when you see her. Her name is Reese." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Natasha stood in the nursery they'd frantically assembled, watching Reese sleep in the bassinet. She thought about the 17 years of waiting, the grief and confusion and desperate hope. She thought about all the times she'd questioned her sanity, wondered if she was clinging to fantasy to avoid accepting reality. And she realized that reality was far stranger and more beautiful than any fantasy she could have invented. Brad appeared in the doorway, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Do you think you'll still have the dream?" he asked softly. Natasha considered the question. "I don't think I need it anymore," she said. "The dream was the bridge between who I was and who I needed to become. Now that I'm here, now that she's here, the bridge has served its purpose." They stood together in the darkness, 2 parents marveling at the mystery they'd been granted. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snowfall. Natasha dressed Reese in a red velvet outfit, impossibly tiny, and they attended the evening service at St. Catherine's Church. Father DeLuca's sermon focused on miracles, on the ways the divine breaks through into ordinary life, on faith in what cannot be seen. He referenced Natasha's story with her permission, his voice thick with emotion, as he spoke about dreams that span years and promises kept in unexpected ways. The congregation sang Silent Night by candlelight, and Natasha held Reese against her chest, feeling her daughter's heartbeat sync with her own. After the service, congregants approached to meet Reese. Shanice kissed the baby's forehead and whispered a blessing. Pastor Raymond Okonkwo from the African Methodist Episcopal Church laid gentle hands on Reese's head and prayed in Igbo. Dr. Pritchard, Natasha's therapist, smiled through tears and said, "You weren't grieving a loss, Natasha. You were mourning an absence. Now she's here and you're whole." The words resonated deep in Natasha's chest. They walked out into the snow, Reese's first snowflakes landing on her bundled blanket. The world felt scrubbed clean, full of potential and promise. Rebecca linked her arm through Natasha's free arm, and Brad held them all close, a family of 4 standing in the church parking lot while snow fell and Christmas lights glowed, and the impossible became undeniably, beautifully real. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. Reese woke hungry at 6, and Natasha fed her in the pre-dawn quiet, savoring the weight of her daughter in her arms, the tug of her feeding, the absolute rightness of the moment. When the sun finally rose, they gathered in the living room. Rebecca opened her presents first, college textbooks and concert tickets, and a necklace from Brad. Then came the ceremony of opening Reese's gift. Inside the silver wrapping paper was a hand-knitted blanket, soft cream wool with an intricate cable pattern. Natasha had made it years ago, in 2006, after the dream had repeated for the 3rd time. She'd worked on it obsessively for months, not understanding why, but unable to stop. When it was finished, she'd tucked it away in the linen closet, too painful to look at, too precious to discard. Rebecca had found it while searching for supplies, and knew immediately it belonged here. Sewn into the corner was a tiny tag, yellowed with age, that read in Natasha's handwriting, "For Reese with 17 years of love." Brad set up his phone to video call his parents in Florida and Natasha's sister Lorraine in Seattle. Both sides of the family wept openly when they saw Reese, heard the full story, witnessed the blanket and the presents in the impossible timeline. Lorraine, usually pragmatic to a fault, could only say, "Some things are bigger than us. Some things we're just meant to receive with gratitude." The afternoon dissolved into the comfortable chaos of a family's first Christmas together. They ate too much, dozed on the couch in a tangle of limbs, and took 1,000 photos. Brad set the camera timer to capture all 4 of them. Reese sleeping peacefully between her parents, Rebecca's head on Natasha's shoulder. That photo became their Christmas card the following year. But more importantly, it became the image Natasha looked at whenever doubt crept in, whenever the magnitude of what had happened threatened to overwhelm her. 1 year later, December 2024, the Elmwood Community Center hosted a combined celebration for Reese's first birthday and Christmas. The main hall was packed with everyone who'd been part of the story. Judith, Denzel, and Keiko had organized everything, transforming the space into a winter carnival. Reese, dressed in a red tulle dress that made her look like a tiny ornament, took her first wobbly steps toward the Christmas tree, while the crowd erupted in cheers. Natasha watched her daughter reach for an ornament, the same silver-wrapped box that had appeared in her dreams, now real and tangible. Later, when the party had quieted and guests were saying goodbye, Natasha sat in the same spot where she'd collapsed exactly 1 year earlier. She thought about the journey, the waiting, the not knowing. She thought about every December when the dream had returned, reliable as sunrise, promising something she couldn't understand. She thought about collapsing on this floor, terrified and confused, giving birth to a future she'd been shown but hadn't believed possible. Judith sat beside her, both of them watching Reese toddle between Rebecca and Brad. "You know what I think?" Judith said quietly. "I think some souls are so determined to be born that they announce themselves years in advance. They send out a signal, plant a seed, make themselves known before their time. Reese was always your daughter. She was just waiting for the right moment to arrive. Natasha nodded, tears spilling over for the 1,000th time that year. 17 years, she whispered. She made me wait 17 years. Judith squeezed her hand. And you waited, that's the real miracle. You kept faith in something you couldn't explain, couldn't prove, couldn't make anyone else understand. You honored that dream every single year. Maybe that's what made space for her to arrive. Now, as Natasha tells this story, Reese is 2 years old, a whirlwind of energy and joy, who inherited Brad's blue eyes and Natasha's stubborn determination. The dreams stopped after Reese was born, replaced by the chaotic, beautiful reality of raising a toddler at 45. Natasha keeps the journal, though, stored carefully in a fireproof safe. Someday, when Reese is old enough to understand, Natasha will show her those pages. She'll explain how she knew her daughter's name before she knew she was coming, how 17 Decembers of dreaming prepared her for 1 December of receiving. The medical community remains fascinated by Natasha's case. Dr. Blackwell published a paper on cryptic pregnancies in older women with previous fertility complications. Dr. Brennan uses Natasha's story in lectures about humility in medicine, about acknowledging the limits of what we can predict or control. But for Natasha, the medical explanations matter less than the lived experience. She knows what she saw in those dreams. She knows what she held in her arms at 12:03 p.m. on December 1st, 2023. Some nights after tucking Reese into bed, Natasha stands in her daughter's doorway and watches her sleep. She thinks about alternate timelines where she dismissed the dreams as grief-induced fantasy, where she never spoke them aloud, where she let bitterness over infertility consume her. She thinks about how close she came to missing this, not because Reese wouldn't have been born, but because Natasha might not have been ready to recognize her. The dreams prepared her, softened her, kept her heart open even when logic said to close it. Rebecca, now planning her wedding to Tyler, often brings her fiancé to Sunday dinners, where Reese performs for them with toddler enthusiasm. Rebecca told Natasha once that watching her mother's journey taught her something crucial about faith. Not religious faith necessarily, she clarified, but faith in the process. Faith that what's meant to find you will find you, even if the path makes no sense while you're walking it. Brad, who started the story as a skeptic, has become the dream's most ardent defender. When friends or family question the timeline, express doubt about the prophetic nature of Natasha's visions, Brad pulls out his phone and shows them the journal entries, the dates, the consistency. My wife knew our daughter 17 years before she was born, he says with absolute certainty. Call it whatever you want, God, fate, coincidence, I don't care. It happened, she's here, that's what matters. For Natasha, the story isn't about convincing anyone of anything. It's about witnessing mystery, about remaining open to possibilities that transcend medical diagnoses and statistical probabilities. It's about a promise made across time, kept against impossible odds. It's about a little girl named Reese who was patient enough to wait 17 years for her mother to be ready to find her. The silver-wrapped present ornament hangs on their tree every year now, a permanent fixture. Inside it, Natasha placed a tiny scroll with a note she wrote in 2003, just after the first dream, before she understood what it meant. For the child of my dreams, whenever you arrive, know that I've been waiting. She doesn't remember writing it, but there it was, tucked in the ornament box, waiting to be discovered. As Christmas approaches this year, Natasha prepares for the season differently than she has in 2 decades. There's no anxiety about the dream returning, no grief over unfulfilled longing. Instead, there's Reese demanding to help decorate, toddler hands grabbing ornaments with more enthusiasm than coordination. There's Rebecca, home from graduate school, already teaching her little sister songs. There's Brad, untangling lights and making the same jokes he makes every year. There's wholeness where absence used to live. And if sometimes, in quiet moments, Natasha wonders what other mysteries are unfolding in invisible ways, what other promises are being whispered across time to people who haven't learned to listen yet, she smiles, because she knows now that impossible is just a word we use for miracles we haven't experienced yet. She knows that some dreams aren't fantasies to escape into, but futures trying to break through. She knows that her daughter announced herself 17 years early, planted her name in her mother's sleeping mind, and waited with the patience of someone who knew, absolutely knew, that she was already loved. So if this story resonates with you, if you've experienced something that defied explanation, if you've had a dream that felt like more than just your sleeping mind wandering, drop a comment and share your experience. Hit that subscribe button to hear more incredible true stories of faith, family, and the beautiful mysteries that change our lives forever. And remember, sometimes the longest wait leads to the most precious arrival. Have you ever had a premonitory dream? I'd love to read your story.